Welcome back to Thisrupt Talk. We apologize for the delay. It's about 20 minutes late, a little technical difficulty.
Thai time.
Thai time to welcome the new year. Kun Bo, how was your new year, by the way?
As good as it could get.
As it could
amid
get.
this COVID and everything. But anyway, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too. But we're not going to be talking about COVID-19. We're going to be talking about how many Thai people, the conservative, the traditionalists, react to the storming of Capitol building in the United States. But before we get to that, let's discuss the latest happening in this ongoing saga of Donald Trump and what's happening in America. So, the latest happening, Kun Bo, Twitter banned Mr. Trump from Twitter, which must have been very heartbreaking for him because he has been many people call him an internet troll. Not me, many people call him an internet troll. Even before he was president, he was always active on Twitter saying sometimes wonderful things, sometimes outlandish things. But nonetheless, he has been banned. And you have an opinion about that, which sort of go against the grain, because my understanding is that most people around the world rejoice at it. Finally, it's banned. So what's your opinion on this?
Okay, before I felt anything, I had to go through what actually happened, and I saw through some of the messages that was banned, and that led to the permanent suspension of his account.
Right.
And it did surprise me because I saw a lot of worse things on Twitter. Twitter is a nasty place for me. I'm sorry for the Twitter's
anyone who
members out there, but yeah, there's a lot of dark side on Twitter,
right.
and it is obviously allowed. There's a lot of pornography. People even have the prostitution service offered on Twitter in Thailand, and there's a lot of hate speech and many things, and no one has to show the real identity to Twitter. That means they can almost all get away with it. And there are a few accounts that I think should be suspended, but it's still there. But look at the some of the messages that caused Trump's account permanently suspended.
Right.
For example, the 25 million great American patriot who voted for me, America first, and make America great again, will have a giant voice long into the future. They will not be disrespected or treated unfairly in any way, shape, or form.
Okay.
This is one of the messages that caused the ban.
Okay.
So, can you get the math?
Does that message fall under the category of inciting violence? That's the question.
Big Twitter said,
Uh-huh.
This tweet is being interpreted as further indication that President Trump does not plan to facilitate an orderly transition. I think that is a very broad interpretation. Beyond it even takes imagination to get to that interpretation. And it reminds me of the movie Minority Report. Have you seen that movie?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, so it's about punishing someone before he did a crime, because there's a system that can identify that this person is about to commit a crime.
But given his rhetoric before all of this, he has been very doing a lot of grandstanding about not backing down, about not wanting to leave the presidency, about that accusation of election fraud, so on and so forth. And he has been stirring up his supporters for quite some time now. Could this be construed as a part of the stirring up of his supporters that eventually led to the riot at Capitol Hill and the siege of
I think that it is true that he did provoke his supporter to that action, and he did not only do it on Twitter, right? He did it on site at the protest as well. But look at another message that led to the suspension. He said, "To all of those who have asked, I will not be going to the inauguration on January the 20th."
Okay, well, that's childish. That is infantile, childish, definitely.
And Twitter said this was being received by a number of his supporters as further confirmation that the election was not legitimate. Well,
that's fake news.
Yeah, and it was his belief, right? I think my point is, there are many protest leaders
Right.
around the world using Twitter to call for the protest before, and not all the protests end up peacefully. For example, some of the protests in Hong Kong.
Right.
And what happened to those accounts is still there.
Uh-huh.
However, I understand that sometimes we have to weigh the social security over the freedom of speech, and I'm in for that. Not a problem at all. Trump has 88 million people followers on Twitter for his account, and if he can really provoke violence, that's massive. However, I think I doubt the Twitter double standard behavior.
We may disagree a little bit with this one because, in my opinion, if you take each tweet that you read out, obviously none of those are inciting violence. But if you put everything in the context of the things he has said weeks ahead of the siege of Capitol building, and also his status as president of the United States of America, his 88 million followers, and also the mood and the propensity for violence of a lot of these people, and we have seen evidence to that in the siege of Capitol building last week. And so perhaps Twitter want to nip this in the bud. But again, it's not black or white, right? There's also an issue of are they fairly tweeting Trump? Which brings me to this point. This kind of thing happens when you fall from power. You become vulnerable. When you're no longer a president, then people don't support you anymore. Even the powerful people don't support you anymore. As we know, Fox have abandoned Trump, so on and so forth. And Trump also, maybe, according to the news report, may be up on charges with election fraud himself, and also for inciting the violence, the seizure of Capitol building. At least that's according to Yahoo News. That's what I read.
Right. Actually, Twitter is not the only one who banned Trump.
Right.
Facebook did the same, and even Google has moved Parler app. It is the kind of social media application that a lot of Trump supporters use. Google just removed it from the Play Store.
Well, Mark Zuckerberg never liked Trump.
Right. So it's politically motivated. We can say that, and I won't say I disagree with it. I'm quite moderate on this, but these social media platforms have to prepare to answer the society and the global community. If such thing happen in other country and with other account, would they do the same?
So
would they apply the same
everybody.
standard? Right.
But taken away from that, if we talk real politics, Trump has made a lot of enemies, and a lot of this, in my opinion, is political payback, and it's true in many countries around the world. Like, let's take a look at General Cha. One of the reasons he's holding on to his power for dear life and will never let go, because as everyone should know, if he's not prime minister anymore, then perhaps there might be payback or karma. If Trump can be brought up on charges and he doesn't have the presidency to protect him anymore, just think of the charges that can be thrown at General Prayut.
Very
the things
true.
He have done since
And
the coup d'etat up to now.
And that's why many people suspect that Trump is prepared
Right.
to give amnesty to himself, like to pass. I don't know, it's an amnesty bill or a kind of
A
mechanism.
self-pardon,
Right.
which
Before.
has never been done before, if I'm correct.
Many people said he might do it before the 20th of January, so that is to be seen.
Well, it's interesting. We will follow up on that. However, the topic for today are how Thais react to the storming of Capitol building. But again, just before we get to that, let's set the stage by reading out a few quotes from world leaders from both sides. World leaders from both sides, and see what they say about the seizure of Capitol building. First, we have the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who a lot of people say is the Donald Trump of his own country, by the way.
Really?
He said,
Hey, that's...
There you
Oh.
go. I didn't say it, other people say it. The United States stands for democracy around the world, and it is now vital that there should be a peaceful and orderly transfer of power. French President Emmanuel Macron: what happened today in Washington, D.C. is not American. We believe in democracy. The German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, and I love her, by the way, for this sarcasm, because I'm a fan of sarcasm. Ms. Merkel posted on Twitter, I can assure you that my departure from office is going to be very boring, unlike Trump's departure. So that's what
I love that. That's
you love
hot.
that.
Right.
Do you have a favorite quote from this event, Kunbo?
Of all those three, I love Angela most, but my favorite is from Joe Biden himself.
Okay, what did he say?
He said, "Today is a reminder, a painful one, that democracy is fragile. To preserve it requires people of goodwill, leaders with courage to stand up, who devoted not to pursuit of power and personal interest at any cost, but to the common good."
Keywords. Democracy is fragile. No one can understand that better than Thai people. It's so fragile. It can go away just like that. Next batch of quotes. This is from the non-democratic world.
Right.
First, we have Iranian President Hassan Rouhani. What we saw in the United States last night showed the failure and the frailty of Western democracy in the world. Konstantin Kosachev, chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the upper house of the Russian parliament. Not Vladimir Putin, he didn't say anything about this, but this gentleman, Konstantin, gave a quote. He said, "The holiday of democracy is over." Now, the next quote is quite interesting and also very reflective of how a lot of people in Thailand think. But these quotes are not from anyone Thai. These are from China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Hua Chunying. Sorry if I mispronounced that. She said, "What words are they using about Hong Kong, the Hong Kong protest? What words are they using now? The mainstream media in the US are condemning the incident using words like violence, thugs, extremist, and disgrace. But what words did they use to describe Hong Kong, the Hong Kong protest? Beautiful, a beautiful sign, a beautiful sight to behold. Fighters of democracy, for example." Also, the Global Times news media channel, which belongs to the Chinese Communist Party, the website said words like karma, retribution, and deserving were frequently mentioned in Chinese netizens' comments when they saw the latest episode of the US real version of the House of Cards. So China have two reactions. One is, see, you are a hypocrite. You condemn the Hong Kong protest.
You praise the Hong Kong protest,
but you condemn your own protesters. And also, they feel rejoiced. Look what happened to you. It's karma. You talk smack about other people's country. Look at what's happening to you. Now, all of this is very much similar to the reaction from Thailand. Now, of course, General Prayut Chan-o-cha nor any of the member of the government have said anything about this, at least not to my knowledge. I have not come across any piece of news regarding this topic, which of course is sensitive, and Thai governments are always
I think
very
Thais
careful
have
with this
very
thing.
good discipline of not talking about global politics.
Right. Well, we play our position well. You know, we have China, we have the US. We don't want to piss anyone off.
Right.
Basically. However, even though the Thai government haven't said anything, I read a story from WorldPoint News, and the story talked about Senator Tammy Duckworth, the half Thai, half American US senator, who's very famous. Senator Duckworth used the term coup, a coup d'etat, to describe this riot and this seizure of Capitol building. And WorldPoint News reported on that, and oh my God, the comments below, everybody was slamming Senator Tammy. See, you last year, said that the Thai government should respect the rights of the pro-democracy protesters. And now you're calling your own protesters a coup. And they are slamming her and slamming her and slamming her, and many Thais are rejoicing at what had happened in the US. Why is that, Kunbo?
I think people are just being so unreasonable here. By having a group of protesters storming the
Capitol building
doesn't mean anything bad to democracy.
Mm-hmm.
They are expressing their opinion in a bad way,
Right.
and they are dealt with by the law.
Right.
And I think it's as simple as that. But well, the reaction of people are from that suppression of feeling that they've had before,
Mm-hmm.
how the U.S. React to what happened in their country.
Right.
For example, I think in Hong Kong it's quite obvious because the U.S. openly support Hong Kong protests because the China is their enemy. And it is true that at some point the Hong Kong protest has gone violent. And if we remember the scene of the protesters storming into the parliament as well in Hong Kong, that happened. But at the time that there's no one inside, it was in the evening and the building was empty. But that is the starting point of how things turn wrong. So when the Chinese government talk about the double standard of the media, when they mention the protests, partly it is true. However, the motive and the form of government is very different, isn't it? The U.S. has full democracy, and the protesters are just not accepting the election result.
Right.
While in Hong Kong, they are in totally different context. They don't have full democracy. They don't even have the right to vote for their own government. It is pre-selected by the Chinese government. So they do fight for democracy, but the protesters in the U.S. is something else. But looking back in Thailand, the protesters of Thailand, they're peaceful protests. Well, to be fair, they don't hold guns like what those in the U.S.
Like that guy in the crazy
Yeah,
costume.
when they storm the Capitol
Right.
building, they have a heavy weapon.
Right.
Heavy weapon,
Right.
not even just a small gun. So that's the difference. However, one of the principle we have to hold on to that is that protesters have to respect the law and the rights of other people who choose their representative to be in the parliament as well. There's no country in the world that let the protesters inside the parliament. So whether it's Hong Kong, Thailand, or the US, if you try to storm into the parliament, the government has the right to protect that venue.
If they storm, that's the key
If
word.
they storm.
If they protest
And that's
peacefully
actually-
in front of government buildings, that should be okay.
That's actually law to distance the protesters from the
50 meters.
government house. 50 meters for Thailand is much longer in Germany.
Right. If I may nitpick a little bit, when you say full democracy in the US, I may have to argue that there's no such a thing as full democracy in the US or anywhere. But we know what you mean.
Okay.
We know what
Yeah.
you mean. We just want to clarify
Right,
that.
right.
It's a big word, full democracy. And interesting point you made about double standard. It depends on what standard do we use, right? If we use democracy as a standard, then we understand that protests are right in a democracy.
Protest is human right. The right to assemble is
Right.
basic human right.
But if that protest become violent, for example, storming, sieging Capitol building, then that protest lost its democratic legitimacy, shall we say, because it's resorting to violence.
Yes,
Would
and
you
I
agree with
think
that?
right, I agree. And this is a big word, legitimacy.
Right.
And it's interesting that the line of legitimacy for each person is different based on who did it.
Well,
Suppose you are the
now you're talking about Thailand, aren't you?
if you are a supporter of a group of protesters, you can accept higher level of violence from them.
Right.
If you are their opponent, you won't accept even a slight act of aggressiveness.
And therein lies a problem, isn't it? What standard do we use? And what you just described there is very true, it's reality. But that's the standard of us versus them. If this is my side, then whatever we do is correct. Whatever the other side do is wrong. So, but the world cannot operate on this standard, right? There have to be
Yes.
a shared standard, and democracy is the usual standard, right? So, no matter which side you are on, right is right, wrong is wrong. If we measure it with the benchmark of democracy. So for example, like in Thailand, we are no strangers to political protest. And we have seen times and times again in which protesters invade government buildings or even private buildings or occupy a certain zone in
or the
city.
parliament, yes.
For example, back in the days, the Yellow Shirts, People's Alliance for Democracy, Kun Sonthi Limthongkul, they invaded, they protested, which is they had every right to do so. You may not agree with what they were protesting for, but they have every right to protest. But then the line was crossed over when they siege government buildings. For example, when they blockade and siege Suvarnabhumi Airport, Dornbirn Airport. So again, do we use democracy as the measurement, or do we use, well, we support the Yellow Shirts so they can do whatever they can do. By the same token, the Red Shirts, United Front for Democracy Against Dictatorship, protest, march, wave banner is your democratic rights. But where is the line? Because they too also siege government buildings and invade other properties. And the same thing with KPPS, PDRC, People's Democratic Reform Committee. Please protest, fight for your right, fight for what you believe in. But again, they cross the line by sieging government buildings, by doing all sort of this violence, by blockading the election, right? And now we have, last year we had the Rasadon movement. The Rasadon movement, they march on government house, they march on the parliament, they march on the German embassy, they even march on the Grand Palace. But, a lot of people are going to hate me for this, but they have not tried to siege anything.
Usually, when a protest group try to siege anything, you have to have a high enough number first.
So are you saying they would siege something if they have a high enough number?
I cannot say that, but the fact is that they don't have that number yet. So we don't really know whether or not they will do it. I think when a protest group storm into government house or the parliament, it will happen only when they feel that it's legitimate to do so. That when they feel, I think there is one context that I would say legitimate, and that context is when you have a full authoritarian government, when they are really not come from the election. For example, 5 years ago, if someone do that with Prayut regime, when he was the head of the NCPO, and he got that power by the coup, I think it's legitimate to do that. But no one did that then because it's too dangerous. But when do you do that with an elected government, be it through a good system or fair election or not? But when you do that with the parliament that has representative of both sides, that other people in the country elected them as well, it means do you disrespect your fellow citizen?
So what you are saying is you basically use democracy as the standard. And if you do it for democracy, you believe it's okay?
Yes, only if you really have full, complete, absolute authoritarian government. But if that government is elected or supported by some part of, other people in the country, if you seize the parliament, if you stop the government from working, that is disrespect to the fellow citizen.
But is that also a little bit dangerous? I mean, there's no black or white answer. But if you use the word democracy, and that means, and if you take that as to mean if you support democracy, then you can do all these things. But if you don't support democracy, then you can't.
Because I'm from the democracy point of view. So I would say the protesters who stormed the Capitol was completely wrong.
Right.
Yeah, they don't respect the parliamentary process, don't respect anyone. It is just anarchy.
It's anarchy, yes. Let's get back to talking about the mentality, the cultural mindset behind. I mean, well, right now, basically, everyone should already know Thailand is generally divided into two groups, right? The pro-democracy supporters and activists who want democracy or as much democracy as Thailand can possibly have. And also on the other side, you have the pro-government, you have traditionalists, conservatives. And
I would say that there are more than two, but okay, if we want to.
Is the other side those wanting republic?
That's one, but it's not all.
Okay.
There's still many. That's the one who want to collapse everything now, and there are people who want to go through the system,
Right.
and there are people who just support the regime, and then other smaller groups probably.
Be that as it may, it seems that whenever something happens in the West, or whenever somebody in the US, somebody of importance anyway, a politician like Tammy Duckworth, so on and so forth, whenever they say something against us, Thailand or the Thai government, we have this very emotional reaction to it, like what happened last year when Tammy Duckworth told called for the Thai government to respect the right of pro-democracy protesters. And
Conservatives don't like it.
Don't like it. And now with what has happened at Capitol building, the conservative rejoice at it. It seems that at least traditionally, not everyone is like this obviously, but traditionally we are very sensitive to whatever the US or the West do or don't do. So the question is, culturally, why are we like that? Do you have a theory on this?
Okay, I'm not part of the we because I'm not sensitive when the foreign country have opinion on Thailand. I'm quite fine with that. But conservatives is based on patriotism, and in their mind Thailand is perfect and should not be touched, especially by the outsiders. And I think it's as simple as that. They can criticize their own country, but they don't want others to criticize their beloved country. What do you think?
I grew up in Texas. A lot of you know. So I think it might be more pronounced in Thailand. But it's not just a Thai thing. This nationalistic, patriotic feelings is universal, and often when in the States, in Texas, talking politics is very normal, and many times when I offer my opinion, because as everybody knows, I'm quite opinionated. When I offer my opinion, I'm often told to get out of America.
Really?
All the time. It happens all the time.
They said that to you?
To which
go back to your country?
Go back to your country. To which my answer always is, I will. Just let me finish my study first. I'm just here temporarily. So,
oh yeah, that's a surprise to me.
Now it happens because again, in every society, in every culture, there's a division between the conservative element and the liberal element. And neither side is perfect, right? There are virtues and flaws on both sides. But definitely, when we talk about national sensitivity and emotional reaction to criticism, definitely the side that are conservative, that are nationalistic, that are patriotic, are more sensitive to these things, and they are quicker to knee-jerk reaction, and they are quicker to racism and hatred and anger, which is quite unfortunate. Having said that, again, not everything is black and white. Antifa, you know them, right? Antifa in America, the anti-fascist movement.
Oh, what do they do?
Like, if we go back 4 years when Trump became president, there was also a big protest against his presidency.
Right.
There were also a lot of violence, a lot of rioting. Nobody stormed Capitol building though, right? And this violence were done by a group called Antifa. Supposedly standing for anti-fascism, but they were also using violence. However, Trump winning the presidency 4 years ago, it may be unfortunate in many ways, but it was democratic. He won a democratic election. So it's an example of extremity is extreme, whether on the left or on the right. Tyranny can occur on both sides.
I see. I think because democracy takes a lot of effort because it is actually in conflict with human nature.
Right.
Human nature as well as other animals' nature, we want what we want.
Exactly.
We want to have our way. So in democracy where you are told to accept what the majority have chosen,
right.
it is hard. It is hard for your heart because it's against the nature. So it takes practice. It takes effort
Right.
And that's why Joe Biden said democracy is fragile. And I also have another quote I would like to share with you that confirm this thought. It is from Sam Shepard, who is a playwright.
Right.
He said, democracy is a very fragile thing. You have to take care of democracy. As soon as you stop being responsible to it and allow it to turn into scare tactics, it's no longer democracy, is it? It's something else. It may be an inch away from totalitarianism. And I agree, and it reminds me of love. Democracy is like love. It cannot stand on its own and flourish. It takes effort, and you need to, yeah. And why you smile like that? You think of the love of your life in France.
I always think of the love of my life in France, but I'm also smiling because it makes me think, when you say democracy, it requires love and care and patience and so on and so forth. And I think back to Thailand, in which whenever democracy, quote unquote, doesn't work for one faction, then democracy can be so easily discarded by a coup d'etat with thousands and tens of thousands, if not millions of people cheering and applauding, and a lot of people come out with phuomalai giving to the tanks and the soldiers. So
yes.
In Thailand, democracy is treated like, forgive me for saying this, treated like a prostitute.
Yeah, that's the...
Here, this is the money. Let us do the thing. When we're done, if it doesn't work anymore, get out.
That's a concrete, tangible thing to say how democracy is destroyed here.
Right.
But there's also something that is more subtle, but it did damage democracy, and that is hatred. And that is trying to stop people from speaking out, and the kind of culture we had and the kind of culture we may be creating that is not very productive, counterproductive to democracy.
Freedom of speech is another great topic that you and I need to discuss and analyze also with our audience, with their questions and comments. We'll do that another time. But right now, let me just read out some comments and some questions from our audience. We don't want to ignore them, and even though I'm in love with my own voice, I actually be the only one talking. We have, and again, I apologize if I mispronounce anyone's name. We have Kun Pote Johnny, who said hello from Lapland in Finland, and Norway borderland in the Northern Light. Hello, all the way from Norway and Finland. Patrick Hennessy says, self-pardon is a contradiction in terms. You are correct, sir. And also in Thailand, we have another term, self-coup.
Self-coup.
Which is
self-censorship?
Self-censorship, which we do culturally. Kun Patrick Hennessy also said, I think we need to stop thinking that it's democracy or a bad alternative, whether China, Russia, a coup, or... Wait, sorry, I lost it. Where did it go? Democracy only works in a free, informed country. Millions of Americans are not informed, hence Trump's 50 plus million supporters, they are doing this to this day. I'm going to disagree a little bit with this. I half agree. Democracy works best in a free and informed country. But you can't wait for a country to be free and informed and have democracy. It's like chicken and egg.
Democracy is a journey, isn't it? There's no end. As you said earlier, it's like no country that has a perfect democracy.
Right.
It's a work. It's an ongoing work, and it's unfinished.
Right. Well, let me just say this though. I mean, it's true, democracy works best in a free and informed country. And perhaps that is why in a non-democratic country or in countries that don't really want to become democracy, they have a lot of censorship. There's a lack of freedom of information. There's such a thing as Computer Crime Act. There's such a thing as Article 116. There's such a thing as Article 112. And all sort of things that are put in place for the purpose of shut up. Don't say this, don't say that, don't talk, don't share, don't like, because information is knowledge, knowledge is power, and power is dangerous. A smart citizenry is dangerous to the government. Allow me to read some more. We're just going to go through this a little bit. I'm excited because it's been like over a month since we have done Thisrupt Talk. So let's go through more. คุณพงศธร นครศรี The reason why some Thais react joyfully on the storming is because they think the US is behind the student protest in Thailand. And that is
right on.
hammer and nail on the head. Exactly, right? We have been discussing this for months and months and months. A lot of Thai people do believe that the US and Western democracies are behind.
And it's so not, I can confirm. And they only believe that because they see some of the activist photos with the ambassador at some kind of reception, which is totally normal, guys. These embassies always invite people who has anything to do with politics, you know, be it academic, journalists like you and me also go into a lot of embassies as an activist, joining the events just because they want information from everyone, and it doesn't mean that they support anyone in particular. It's just their job.
Allow me to play the conspiracy theorist. What about Open Society and George Soros? They are funding certain platform and certain movements in Thailand. Would that be considered an international conspiracy also?
Does Greenpeace support some of the environmental friendly organization?
Yes.
I don't know, but if you have a fund, if you have a foundation and you support democracy, you pay for people who work on democracy. If you support environment, you pay for people who work to protect the environment. If you support education, you pay for education organization. What's wrong with that?
Well, it's kind of like these organizations have been supporting democracy around the world for years and years and years and years, even back when Thailand was sort of democracy. So whatever they are doing now is nothing personal against Thailand. It's just in general, they want to support democracy around the world, right?
Yeah, it's just business as usual to me.
Patrick Hennessy again, in Thailand, it is more than democracy versus no democracy. It is about attitude to the hierarchy, including the monarchy. We have discussed this. We'll likely discuss it again, but not today, of course. Let's see, anything else?
Yeah, I think it will be very interesting when in the next time when we talk about the freedom of speech and how governments around the world can control or try to support it, because with the world of internet and social media, there's a big challenge there to find the right balance.
And I'll leave this final thought. Whatever happened in the US last week, the storming of the Capitol building, the rioting, the Americans carrying guns, so on and so forth, and trying to restore Trump's presidency or whatever, it did not end with tanks rolling in, which means it did not end with a coup d'etat. And that's the whole point. In every society, in every democracy, there are protests. And many protests do get out of hand. That's human nature. The point is the government, the law, the constitution have to be intact.
Yes.
The duty of the army, the military, the police, or whoever is to protect that democratic constitution. And as long as you protect that constitution and your democracy, everything is fine. Everything else is just growing pain. However, if trouble starts and the first thing you do is throw away your democracy with a coup d'etat, then you get what we have in Thailand, a country with 20 coup d'etats. 14 of them are successful. And here we are today in 2021. Looking forward to possibly more protest if the COVID thing calmed down a bit.
Yeah, democracy is not military camp.
Right.
It won't be silent. It will be chaotic sometimes, but it's all the learning process. It's all healthy as long as we hold on to the values needed as the fundamental.
And again, thank you for joining us. And remember, this is the new Thisrupt. We have changed format. We have changed things. We are doing videos. We are doing Thisrupt Talk live. We are championing independent journalism.
And we even have the support.
If you like what we do, please support her. It doesn't cost me. It helps keep producing content. If you don't like what we do, that's fine. freedom of choice, personal choice. Turn up, switch the channel. There are many other platforms, channels, websites that do wonderful contents in Thai or in English. But if you like us, if you want us to keep doing our things, then please become a supporter. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.